My grandmother once leaned across the teacups and murmured, "Not everyone is meant for greatness, darling." She said it gently, almost tenderly, as if she were blessing me instead of breaking me. Someone has to hold up the heroes. I was 20 then, newly assigned, uniform sharp, ambition still burning bright. I don't think she meant to hurt me. But words don't need malice to become knives. That sentence split my life clean in two. It became the quiet drumbeat beneath everything I did. At every family gathering, in every sideways glance, I felt it echo while they poured their pride into my sister, the chosen one, the achiever. They never called me a disappointment out loud. They didn't have to. Silence can be louder than contempt. When my sister advanced, they announced it like a miracle. When I survived, it barely registered. When I returned from my tour, no one was waiting at the terminal. "You're always busy," my father said, as if I'd missed brunch, not 8 months of classified operations in places that don't exist on maps. At Christmas, my chair was given to a friend's daughter because she'd gotten into medical school. That, apparently, was worth celebrating. So I ate standing up, pressed against the counter, my medals sealed in a crate in the shed like something shameful. That night, something in me went quiet for good. I stopped reaching. I stopped hoping. I'd faced gunfire without flinching. I refused to keep bleeding for people who couldn't see me. And then, weeks ago, I found myself seated at the back of a strategy briefing. No visible insignia. No seat at the table, by design. I was there to observe. Invisible again. And as I stared at the room, I realized this wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. One I had carried long enough. The space hummed with designations and hierarchies, labels that always felt awkward on me, until the entrance swung wide. A senior officer strode in, gaze sweeping, and paused. Directly on me. He adjusted his stance, drew taller, and declared, "Ma'am, you're the commander." And abruptly, the chamber went still. Not for her, not for my sister, for me. That instant wasn't gentle. It was piercing. It was decades of being overlooked shattering in one exhale. And for the first time ever, I wasn't ashamed to claim my presence. My name is Melissa Evans. I've guided teams through chaos, clasped the palms of troops fading in dust, and issued orders that haunt my nights. But the toughest battle I've fought was enduring erasure in my own household. Before I unfold my tale, I need to feel your presence. Just leave a "hearing you" in the replies, or share where you're tuning in from. It touches me more than you know. Sometimes, sensing an audience out there eases the burden of voicing the raw facts. And if my narrative resonates, if it eases your isolation, think about hitting subscribe. It spreads this honesty wider. Thanks. And now, allow me to reveal it all. My name is Melissa Evans, eldest child of the Evans clan. 4 generations steeped in service, rigor, and unvoiced demands. We were essentially nurtured on installation routines. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the armed forces weren't merely a job. It was our household creed. My father, Gary Evans, retired from the Marine Corps as a brigadier general. My mother, Sharon, worked as a field nurse and carried her reserve like an extra badge. My younger brother's currently a captain. And Christina, my little sister, is on the verge of being elevated to colonel in the Navy. And me? I'm the one they hush about. To the relatives, I'm the dropout, the one who left Annapolis after year 1 and vanished from the official story. They claimed I couldn't manage the regimen, the order, said I lacked the grit. But none realized I didn't quit. I was selected, chosen for a secret ops initiative so shrouded it wasn't on any books. No diploma, no parade, no mounted picture on the mantle, just a chain of flights to spots no vacationer would venture. For the past 2 decades, I haven't been missing from their world. I've simply been redacted. I dispatched anniversary bouquets to Mom, a holiday note to Dad with a phony postmark from Virginia. I observed from the shadows as Christina ascended the ladder, as my brother tied the knot on a station green, as their existences progressed in tidy, visible segments. I wasn't featured. Actually, an aunt once mentioned a group portrait where I'd been edited out to even the composition. They insisted I fled because I wasn't resilient. What they ignored, what I couldn't disclose, was that I endured 7 months embedded in maneuvers in Baghdad, that I hid for 5 days within the barriers of a captive site in Yemen, orchestrating an extraction that freed 25 innocents, that in the op called Shadow Flame, I mourned 4 of my team and a fragment of my soul I haven't reclaimed. And yet I persisted, just never returned. You don't share those accounts in this lineage unless they arrive with decorations and media spotlight. I possess neither, only wounds, mostly unseen. Then the summons arrived. It was late autumn. Brisk winds, amber foliage gripping the clothes of warmth. My device vibrated. It was my mother. Her tone was efficient, not harsh, but distant, like a doctor reciting stats, not addressing her offspring. Christina's advancing. You ought to attend. Just don't show up in anything odd. Don't overshadow her. No, how have you been? No, we'd adore having you. Just don't disgrace us. I didn't contest. I replied, I'll make it. Not expecting fanfare. Not assuming embraces. I was returning for a single purpose. To check if, just once, they could gaze at me and perceive the person beyond the shade, to see if under proper illumination they'd grasp they'd undervalued me for ages. That evening, I faced my wardrobe. Tucked away was my vintage formal attire, pristine, unused, pressed as if anticipating a ritual that never occurred. I tucked it into my bag. Beside it, I placed a gentle, subdued top and pants. Garments that wouldn't demand eyes, that wouldn't cry for acknowledgement. Merely soft material in muted shades. In the reflection, my visage gazed back. Keen gaze, creases near the lips from excessive dawns in wastelands. A countenance no longer youthful, but not aged. Just resolute. No insignia, no ovation, no bitterness. Almost ready, I murmured to the pain. I wasn't sure if I meant ready to pardon or ready to allow the hush to finally declare itself. I reached Fort Bragg precisely on schedule. No affectionate reception, no one lingering outside, not even a glance from the guard at the barrier. The reserved spots were packed, filled with luxury crossovers and official vehicles. I slotted in near the supply depot's barrier, where the pebbles grated beneath my shoes like they recalled my identity, even if others forgot. The residence remained largely unaltered. Identical taupe exterior, identical faded veranda bench, identical banner fluttering with formal dignity. I pushed open the entrance and entered the familiar atmosphere scented with citrus polish and worn novels. My mother positioned in the living area, setting scripted place markers along the spread. Without glancing, she instructed, "Switch your top. You and Christina will be adjacent, but kindly don't disrupt her address tomorrow." No greeting. No embrace, no remark on the reality I'd traveled 12 hours to arrive. Just directives, as ever. My father acknowledged me the manner commanders do when one's facing early discharge. A solid slap on the shoulder, a dip of affirmation, akin to esteem, but devoid of warmth. "Glad you arrived," he stated, vision already drifting beyond to the space aft. Christina made her debut like a starlet in regalia. Her outfit was flawless, insignias buffed to brilliance, accolades arrayed as if she'd triumphed a conflict solo. She glided through the chamber, greeting palms and enchanting associates. When she eventually spotted me, she motioned toward me with a groomed finger. "This is my sister. She dabbled in service briefly. Now she's in clerical work, I believe." Laughter ensued, airy, courteous, the sort that slices deeper since none view it as mean. An uncle inclined and inquired in a low murmur, "So, what's your gig now? Benefits admin?" "It's something." "Huh?" "Something." I grinned. "Not broad enough for enamel. Just sufficient to let it fade." I uttered zilch. There's grace in muteness, particularly when your facts are restricted. Within the abode, each surface was a monument. Mounted images of my kin in attire, commencement shots, departure rituals, honor banquets. I perused every border. None contained my likeness. The final with me dated 2005, right post-Annapolis exit. I recollected because I was trimmed later. They claimed it was for the fresh casing. A small nephew, perhaps 8 or 9, yanked my sleeve. "Did you ever fire an actual weapon?" he queried, orbs wide and thrilled. I knelt to his height and beamed. "Kiddo, I once devised a strategy that guided 25 fighters safely back. That's superior to any blast I've launched." He winked, then dashed a toy with a model jet. Supper was a modest pre-event affair, solely kin and select leaders. Christina enacted the ideal MC, all elegance and strategy. At a juncture, a guest praised her composure. She glowed. "I've rehearsed my talk," she noted, nursing a drink, then offhandedly, "I aim for folks to grasp you don't need to flee something to admit you erred." The atmosphere in the space altered faintly. I remained mute. No necessity. The intent was evident and bore my label. Later that dusk, I ventured onto the deck solo. The dwelling hummed with chatter and mirth rearward, but I sought none. Far off, a horn ensemble practiced. Melodies drifted via the gloom like specters. I perched on the stair rim, observing the breeze stir the branches. Tomorrow I'd rest silently, grant her the spotlight. But verity possesses its own timbre. And when it elects to articulate, nobody, not Christina, could overpower it. The auditorium at Fort Bragg was a sanctuary of authority. Lofty vaults, copper luminaries projecting Ariat rings over stern lines of collapsible seats. All ordered by status and designation like a skirmish sans rounds. I occupied the 4th rank from rear, squeezed amid a subaltern's partner and a relative's heavily scented kin. Our line was tagged kin miscellaneous, an administrative means of noting your attendance, but marginal. Christina loomed erect behind the lectern up front. The standard to her port, gleaming footwear to her starboard. She bore that expression, restrained blaze, the type honed in drills and evaluations. She discoursed on fidelity, endurance, and my top pick, the value of separating from those who deserted the hallowed vow of duty. Each term deliberate, each peak staged. The oration wasn't solely for her overseers. It targeted phantoms, and one phantom specifically. When my moniker surfaced merely as a kin present, I observed several crania pivot. A duo of leaders swapped muted remarks. One bent to another and muttered, "She seems known." Where'd I spot her prior? I held steady. I maintained forward gaze, carriage impartial, expression blank. That's when he arrived. General Stevens. He advanced with subdued gravity, the variety that stiffens a venue ere it comprehends. He surveyed the crowd succinctly before his sight fixed on mine. A spark of awareness, then a crisp, straight path to my position. My pulse didn't surge, my hands didn't dampen, but the ether nearby transformed like gust pre-alert. The general halted abruptly beside, soles snapping. He lifted his arm in a precise salute. Crisp, dignified, and overt. "Ma'am," he intoned, timbre firm and distinct. "Commander Evans, it's a privilege to encounter you anew." The venue didn't merely hush, it solidified. Christina's delivery fractured mid-phrase. Her grip on the cue sheet quivered. The cheers that had flowed post her prior segments evaporated. She ceased being the focal draw. I ascended to reciprocate the gesture, not for acclaim, but as I declined to leave a leader who'd entrusted me with fates isolated in homage. From my periphery, I witnessed my mother fumble her tumbler. The clatter of it striking the ground resounded like a discharge. My father half rose instinctively, then gradually reclined, as if aiming to vanish into the cushion. A novice leader aft leaned to his peer and whispered, "Not hushed enough. Is that the one?" The phantom director from Vale. Christina labored to recompose. She endeavored to proceed, timbre fragile and orbs scouring the space for moorings, but the vibe had pivoted. Gazes no longer clung to her utterances. They affixed to me or graver, to the chasm betwixt presumed knowledge and emergent realization. The rite concluded with courteous claps, but the strain hovered like Hayes' post-managed blaze. As attendees departed and leaders socialized, Christina ambushed me by the egress. No felicitations, no grin. "Why didn't you mention it?" She snarled softly. "You allowed me to posture there like an idiot. Was that your scheme?" I regarded her, not cruelly, but unyielding. "If truth must diminish for you, you never truly towered." Her lips compressed. She fluttered lids swiftly twice, as if restraining a surge. I strode by ere she could retort, the taps of my footwear resounding on the buff tile. This instance, as I departed, I lacked the familiar prick of unseen mocks at my rear. Rather, I sensed the burden of bewilderment trailing. A whole assembly dubious of the parts they'd been allotted, now cognizing the roster might have been flawed. Post-right, I skipped returning to Kin's domicile. I motored back to the installation and accessed the subdued, plain lodgings they'd designated. Typical service drab partitions, rigid linens, and a fixture that buzzed softly when activated. The sort of chamber designed to accommodate transients and dismiss them promptly. I tossed my fobs on the bureau, shed my footwear, and noted an anomaly. A simple craft packet centered precisely on the workstation. No label, no emblem, no script, merely positioned as if eternally awaiting. I unsealed it. Within was a duplicated transmission dated 18 months prior. No originator noted, just relayed from a coded hub. The header, negligent maneuver, non-combatant losses. The content held charges versus a Melissa E., indicting her of overseeing an unauthorized venture yielding several innocent fatalities. The dispatch asserted the specifics were obscured in censored dossiers and pressed a marginal defense weblog to unveil the decay inside. It was an odd feeling perusing your own condemnation penned by another. The verbiage halted me abruptly since I identified it. Not solely the venture cited, but the exact diction almost verbatim from a post-op sealed summary I'd examined in a fortified vault in Berlin. That summary had solely been viewed by three, me, the chief evaluator, and one entry-level leader with marginal approval, Christina. The timelines aligned with a span when I'd abruptly and bafflingly been marked for a concise internal probe. Then, I was informed it was a routine alert mechanism scanning irregularities. Standard, no concern. The matter dissolved in days. I trusted it. But somebody ensured the vapor persisted post the blaze's quench. I carried the packet along. I bypassed altering garb. I located Christina at the post-gala, still attired, encircled by fans, reveling in the gentle hum of triumph. I bided till the throng dwindled, then intercepted her as she exited for a discussion. I elevated the duplicate. She eyed it, her vision snagging as if beholding it afresh. "Did you dispatch this?" I inquired, tone level, not blaming, merely seeking veracity. She gazed protractedly, then sans flutter, affirmed, "Yes." I inclined gradually. "Why?" Her mien held, but her frame sagged like a marionette freshly severed. "Because you weren't meant to prevail," she uttered. "You departed. You didn't remain and construct. You can't return and yet outrank." I stayed immobile. I stayed silent. She continued, timbre fracturing. "They never ceased referencing you, even absent, even as I excelled. I figured if I could excise you entirely, I'd finally be visible." Quiet descended betwixt, denser than any reproach. I perceived the youth in her, the sibling who'd once shadowed me, pleading inclusion, craving distinction in a home where prowess was tender. "You do comprehend," I voiced at last softly, "that divulging restricted data is a felony." Her orbs expanded briefly ere constricting. She voiced not. I abstained from pressing. I pivoted and departed. The chill evening breeze struck like a swell. I gripped the packet, digits quivering. Not from fury, but from the profound, serene throb of comprehension. At times the dagger in your spine originates from the palm that once aided your first steps. It was the wail of the alert siren that roused me. Not the standard dawn reveille, but keener, pressing, shrill. A wail crafted not to stir mildly, but to inject vigor into your veins. My device illuminated shortly after. Crisis measures engaged. All elite access staff summoned to the hub. I lacked moments to query why. Instinct prevailed. I was garbed and exited in instants. The corridors of Fort Bragg teemed with activity. Leaders in diverse alertness, some lacing footwear, others positioned afore shimmering displays. At the ops chamber threshold, a stern sergeant proffered a dossier, slim yet weighty in import. A violation. A restricted portfolio linked to Operation Veil, the endeavor I'd spearheaded in the dim passages of Iraq, had freshly surfaced on a coded darknet board. The exposure was fresh, marked within the prior 4 hours, and graver, the digital track traced to an inner address, precisely a dormant unit once allocated to me, still integrated in the facility network. It resembled awakening in an existence you didn't recall enlisting for. In under an hour, I faced General Stevens and 2 agents from Defense Intel Agency. The space felt chillier than actual. They omitted declaring custody, but scrutiny loomed. They demanded complete entry to my exchanges from the last 7 months. I complied sans debate. Yet, unease persisted. My thoughts looped to the transmission, the one Christina forwarded, the duplicate that materialized oddly on my station. I hadn't delved then, but now with agency resources, I extracted the embedded data and decoded the dispatch route. What emerged was jarring. The nameless originator employed an obsolete connection to an auto-archive host that formerly stored task records. That host was long retired, or so presumed. The connection activated a latent routine, one that unwittingly fetched and appended a concealed dossier with supreme clearance details. The dossier now public. A negligent error, but not haphazard. When I followed the source apparatus of the transmission, it indicated a unit accessed 3 days prior via valid credentials. Christina's. She'd registered late at the facility for drill setup, per logs. I recalled her noting abandoning her portable at the signal post overnight, unsecured, unsupervised. Her inflection odd, as if anticipating my response. Now her entry formed a forensic path. I fixated on the radiant panel. My sister, the girl who'd wept at my Annapolis departure. The adult who now, perhaps from despair, was dismantling herself strand by strand. Ere further contemplation, a rap at my interim lodgings shattered the turmoil in my mind. It was my father. He appeared wearier than memory, less rigid, more mortal. We hadn't conversed solo in eons. He skipped salutation, merely lingered at the entry and queried softly, "Is it factual? Did you release it?" I locked gazes. No wrath there, just dread for me, for the lineage title. Perhaps for all he'd upheld regarding integrity and duty. I held firm. "I don't require your faith," I stated, "but I'll validate the facts. Not for self. For those still entrusting this framework with their existences." He assented once, added naught, and retreated. The subsequent dawn, I solicited authority to helm the inner inquiry. It was atypical, but formally I remained on covert standby and possessed the authorization to function. Crucially, I held the drive others lacked, to unmask the breach suns torching the entity that molded and almost interred me. General Stevens heeded Sun's disruption, then rose deliberately, circled the conference slab, and proffered his palm. "Commander," he articulated, gaze unwavering. "The stage is yours." The chamber was so mute, the drone of the overhead illuminations mimicked interference in my oracles. I occupied the lead of the tactical ops venue where I'd once been barred by grade, now placed by exigency. Opposite were delegates from the Defense Probe Office and Installation Safeguard Unit. Their countenances granite, their pads ajar but pristine. I outlined my theory composedly. The infringement wasn't deliberate subversion. It was a domino effect, a chain of imprudent choices and erred moves commencing with a nameless transmission. One dispatched not to treason, but to incite, and thereby ignited a hazard zone. I exhibited embedded data, network paths, and a virtual trail initiating with Christina's transmission and culminating in an exposed restricted dossier. They didn't challenge my rationale, but enacted worse. General Stevens designated an inner squad composed not of specialists or externals, but my kin. I was to direct the group as chief examiner and ops liaison. My father, Brigadier Gary Evans, would oversee historical mission data vaults from prior ventures. He retained limited entry from his post-exit consultative position. Christina was to map inner network flaws and entry nodes. And my mother, with her prior expertise as a field nurse and auxiliary focus on trace forensics, was tasked to aid digital retrieval from the portable abandoned in the tech area. It resembled being hurled into a drama where each performer knew their part, but none desired co-starring. The inaugural squad session was icy. My father commenced with an overview. Vision adhered to the display over any occupant. He articulated in curt cadences like narrating a eulogy. Christina followed with her portion. Brief, proficient, barren. Her timbre lacked modulation. She avoided eye contact throughout. Only my mother occasionally glanced between us like she was watching her children morph into strangers she barely knew. But I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for answers. And then the revelation hit. While sifting through a backup node linked to Christina's network audits, our defense algorithm highlighted a sleeping virus nestled in a 2018 mission repository. It had never been triggered, just hidden within the framework of a supply manifest. The timestamp jumped out. 2018. That was the year I butted heads with Mark Slade, a colleague analyst amid a collaborative push in Fallujah. He'd pushed for a bold clearance through populated areas to neutralize threats. I'd vetoed it, insisting on a staged encirclement approach. It was the correct decision, but it turned me into a threat to him and an emblem of what he deemed procedural cowardice. Mark wasn't merely resentful. He'd briefly possessed interim decryption privileges for the initiative's systems. If he'd sown the code then, it might have lain dormant until someone like Christina unwittingly activated it by probing the incorrect channel. That's when my mother quietly passed me a dossier from Shadow Flame. She said, "You forgot it when you deployed." I went through it. At the time, I figured you were evading. Now I believe you were simply enduring in the background. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The sentiment she offered wasn't remorse. It was something deeper, weightier. Acknowledgement. I grinned, not from satisfaction, but because a change had occurred. Later that night, our networks detected an access signal from an external address. It had attempted fruitlessly to erase records connected to the initial violation. The site, a lodge just beyond Fort Bragg, a 4-day reservation settled in currency. The alias on the booking, Mark Slade. It wasn't solely about my sister any longer or even our kin. There was an individual out there, shrewd, enduring, and eager to exploit our rifts as his cover. A figure concealing amid the turmoil we'd forged ourselves. The assault on the retired data silo resembled a tempest approaching. Muted initially, then charged and acute. With crisis clearance, we encircled the zone with tactical accuracy. Mark had retreated to the sole spot overlooked, the antiquated signal hub from an obsolete unit, still connected to the auxiliary defense grid. He was midway through transmitting a packed archive of intel when we stormed. He didn't fight. He didn't even twitch. Just gazed at me and remarked, "You finally caught up." In questioning, he outlined it all. Not boastfully, but precisely. "I didn't aim to dismantle you openly. Just wanted you sidelined. The data exposure was meant to label you a risk. Once your authorization was revoked, no more alliance panels, no more prime spot in tactical discussions. You ascended too swiftly. Folks ceased doubting you." His tone was acrid, not frenzied. A guy who'd gripped his bitterness until it fermented into fixation. He'd crafted a plan to leverage our clan's splits, counting on Christina's blunder to spark the remainder. I grasped, then he hadn't shattered us. He merely observed our disintegration, then staked his claim. When Christina perused the record of his admission, she remained motionless, wordless. She fixated on the text as if it could reorder into something less ruinous. After several moments, she uttered without facing me, "I had no idea what I started would escalate to this." I crossed my limbs. Sometimes we ignite a parched meadow out of envy. We overlook that lives rest in those blades. Her expression folded subtly, but she maintained composure. That was Christina. Arrogance shielded her regret. The following day, amid assembling our concluding summary, Christina appended a supplement. She assumed complete accountability for sparking the sequence of messages that eventually facilitated Mark's intrusion. Though she faced no legal charges, there was no purpose to divulge national secrets. She consented to an official censure. It would bar her advancement prospects for the next 4 years. She endorsed it unprompted. It didn't register as a triumph. At the final squad assembly, we positioned opposite once more, but this occasion varied. Christina no longer dodged my stare. And when our father arose to deliver his wrap-up comments, he hesitated, then declared, "I must extend regrets to this whole group, particularly to Melissa. I allowed honors and ego to obscure what truly counts." It was the initial instance I'd witnessed him concede error, much less amid a chamber of elite. Christina didn't weep. Nor did I. But when I locked gazes with her, I no longer beheld the rival who'd sought to obliterate me. I saw a lady discovering how to rise independently without toppling others to achieve it. The dawn of the Area Tactics Symposium came with a mist that adhered to the installation like recollection. I positioned off stage under the faint drone of the display and the faint snap of identifiers against a tire. The streamer aft read, "Reimagining Covert Tactics, Aftermath, Intel in Uneven Arenas. 58 leaders, 35 senior consultants, and almost 120 spectators had confirmed. Amid the roster of participants was Colonel Christina Evans, her moniker tidily noted beneath operational trainee. I had forwarded her the summons personally. No elaboration, no alert, just a single phrase entered in the memo field of the dispatch. It's time to grasp what you assumed I ignored. The illumination faded. I advanced to the stand. Sans pompe, sans garde, merely an indicator in my grasp and a span of unseen marks on my frame. I commenced with the plainest fact. Some ventures never earn a title. Some guides never receive a marker. And some conflicts don't initiate at frontiers. They commence where bias supplants comprehension. I observed crania incline. Some known visages, leaders who'd once mirrored Christina's rebukes, regarded me with adjusted esteem. A handful murmured amongst themselves. One inclined to another. That's the one who drafted the Central Asian Safeguard Protocol in 17. Christina occupied the third rank, her stance erect, stylus ready, sight fixed on me. She didn't flutter. She didn't shift, and I sensed this time she was present to absorb. Halfway along, I shifted to an undisclosed portion of the Shadow Flame venture. For the premier occasion in official annals, I revealed a restricted choice I'd enacted solo in the terrain. I authorized the bypass directive that preserved an adversary sector because 9 youths were ensnared within. That endorsement nearly terminated my path. I would enact that identical choice anew. I don't divulge this for pity. I divulge it because verity doesn't require pardon. It merely requires visibility. Murmurs echoed through the venue, not from spectacle, but from lucidity. Conflict was no longer merely a question of land. It was ethical ground. And guidance wasn't solely about correctness. It was about preparedness to bear the burden of selection. As I wrapped the gathering, I pivoted to the platform's flank amplifier and stated, "To wrap, I've requested Colonel Christina Evans to offer her insights as an emerging leader." Christina ascended gradually, her timbre solid, not impeccable. Her orbs were damp, but her frame aligned. I matured believing distinctions were the ultimate aim, that the loftiest voice commanded attention. But today I discovered that genuine merit lies in recognizing whom you can glean from and possessing the fortitude to confess it. The chamber rose in acclaim, not for me, but for something grander. For the notion that power could don subtlety, that direction could be imparted by those we once resented, and that education, even in regalia, never genuinely concludes. In the rear line, my mother positioned with her palms in her skirt. She didn't applaud, but she inclined. For the first time, it resembled endorsement, not of my status, but of my odyssey. As the assembly scattered, a veteran commander neared, his clasp sturdy as he gripped my palm. "I once held that females had no role directing combat zones," he said. I erred. I beamed. Not from conquest, not from conceit. "Errors don't shape us," I said. "But declining to evolve from them does. Today, May, you evolved. That's what counts." A fortnight post-Symposium, I dispatched 3 summons. One to my father, Brigadier Gary, one to my mother, Sharon, and the final to Christina. The venue was intentional. The aged kin residence on the periphery of Fort Bragg. It was the identical dwelling where I'd once passed a lone, uneasy evening post-Annapolis completion. This time I reached first. I arranged the spread. I claimed the lead seat, the one my father had perpetually occupied. When they entered, nobody uttered. My mother clutched a platter in wrap. Christina evaded glances. My father's mien was inscrutable. Once settled, I skipped courtesies. "I didn't summon this meal for regrets," I said. I summoned it to articulate the facts, my facts, for the premiere from my lips. And so I initiated. I informed them I hadn't abandoned the forces. I'd been enlisted into covert ops. I narrated the occasion I was confined for 4 days subterranean in Afghanistan after a botched retrieval path was betrayed by an opposing operative. I depicted the instance I issued the command to bombard a cache to rescue a British scout unit. 4 non-combatants were harmed, none critically, but I endured 9 months under scrutiny and was ultimately exonerated. I informed them I'd rejected a decoration for a restricted Yemeni aid endeavor. Embracing it would have jeopardized international relations, and I opted for hush over acclaim. The space didn't inhale. My mother's orbs brimmed with moisture. Christina fixated on her dish. My father stayed immobile, palms interlaced ahead. Then he queried so softly I nearly overlooked it. "Why didn't you ever disclose to us?" I locked his gaze because you never inquired. And if you had, I doubt you'd have trusted me. It wasn't a strike. It was merely the truth. My mother whispered, "I thought those parcels you forwarded were your method of expressing regret." I negated. They weren't regrets. They were prompts that I persisted, even after I'd been excised from every kin image. I extended beneath the spread and retrieved a craft binder. I pushed it toward Christina. Within was a duplicated version of the nameless transmission, the one she'd dispatched ages prior that almost concluded my vocation. I didn't retain this to accuse you. I retained it to prompt you that terms seemingly unseen can be as lethal as ordnance. Nobody disrupted. Then I articulated distinctly sans spite, just purpose. I don't anticipate embrace, but if we're to progress, it commences with recognizing the individual you elected to overlook. Christina arose. She approached me and rested her palm tenderly on my arm. No utterances. My father ascended leisurely, proceeded to the aged kin ledge, and selected a mounted shot from a distant autumn picnic. He gazed at it momentarily. "This one's lacking somebody," he said. "We'll capture a fresh one." I didn't grin. I merely inclined. Not because I'd pardoned them, but because I no longer required clinging to what pained. A cycle post-Symposium, I reverted to Virginia. I'd recommenced my subdued pattern as the occasional tactical consultant for alliances. Most of my hours were in virtual overviews, dissecting mock scenarios, providing perspective on uneven conflict in Central Asia and the Pacific. I resided solo in a humble flat facing the river. Still roused at 5,000 still penned my summaries in dark pigment, still ignored alerts post $800 p.m. But one element had altered. Once per cycle, I instructed a unique seminar at Fort Bragg on subtle tactics in the era of unconventional skirmish. Christina was perpetually present, never skipped a lecture. She occupied the lead rank, posed the toughest queries, contested me, even argued with me, and occasionally she fell silent when I discussed the ventures that had once divided us. One dusk post-lecture, she proffered a slim portfolio. Within was a drill overhaul suggestion, patterned after ideas I'd presented. "I don't require your endorsement," she said. "I just need to know your opinion." I inscribed one term on the front. Proceed. Our kin now persisted in a subdued form of progression. My mother forwarded scripted memos each cycle, often merely a phrase or two. "Are you nourishing adequately?" She queried in her recent one. My father had begun informing his associates that his daughter counsels elite strategy, no longer just someplace abroad. We lacked a fresh likeness, but the subsequent time I examined the one on the hearth, I was included. Not substituted, not obliterated. At the close of one meeting, a youthful recruit lingered, anxious. Perhaps 24, he inquired, "Ma'am, in conflict, what's the toughest aspect?" I halted, then shared the sole response that ever rang authentic. Enduring without solidifying into marble, not converting your injuries into armaments. That dusk, I strolled aft the drill quarters. The sun descended in amber-crimson glow. Christina materialized alongside, clutching a modest anniversary pastry in a translucent holder. She extended it with a partial grin. 3 terms were scripted atop in green glaze. Commander, Sibling, Mentor. I didn't require cheers. I didn't require chronicles to cite my moniker. I merely required them to regard me, not via honors or faults, but via the lenses that once misconstrued and now ultimately comprehended. In existence, some clashes leave no marks on the flesh, but etch gorges in the spirit. We discover that fortitude isn't always about who vocalizes the strongest, but who selects hush with poise. And occasionally, the most valiant act we can perform is to remain when it's simpler to depart. If this narrative stirred you, I genuinely appreciate hearing your reflections. Leave a remark, share what resonated, and remember to subscribe. Every perspective counts, and yours is no different.